Trying to add colour to the intro has made me realise I've not been very careful completing the edges of shapes. It's going to take a while. I mentioned in a previous video that up until recently, Grand Seiko had been my favourite watch brand. I mentioned in another video that Grand Seiko dials are the main appeal for me, and that I was getting around to make a video on mine, which is the SBGN005 Quartz GMT. You've already seen from the thumbnail and some of the initial footage, this watch isn't exactly impressive when it comes to the dial itself. So why do I own this watch? The answer to that comes largely down to price, but also another form of collecting, one from my childhood, in this case, Pokemon cards. I was doing a clear up of my loft, found my old collection, and decided I want to consolidate something I used to love collecting and turn it into an addition to what I love collecting now. I didn't do any kind of research into selling the cards. I know there are all sorts of websites out there with different valuations available, but I just wanted them to go to people who actually wanted them in their collections. So I listed them all up on eBay individually, put no reserve on them, no buy it now, and I didn't realise how much work I was making for myself. It turns out the collection was worth a lot more than I thought, and I was able to look at watches that I normally wouldn't consider. In addition, there was one card that sold for so much it financed another watch on its own, and that will be a video for the future, no doubt. I'd always fawned after Grand Seiko, for the dials, for the craftsmanship, for the reflection of Japanese culture, and for the movements. I still long for a spring drive, but while I'd made more money than I'd expected from the cards, it wasn't enough to afford something of that calibre, even on the second-hand market where I was shopping. I know that many people would have saved towards a spring drive at this point. But as I always say, this channel is called Impulsive Watches for a reason. I just can't help myself sometimes. I focus my search mainly on eBay, and effectively I could afford less desirable vintage models or second-hand quartz models from the range. The GMT models were the clear standout to me, not only for the styling, but also because a GMT wasn't something I had in my collection. Now I know that quartz has a bit of a negative reputation, but rather than just brush it off as an option, I decided to do some further research into the quartz movements that Grand Seiko offer. The quartz movement range has 4 different versions, all under the 9F heading. A slimline version, a date display version, a caliber featuring a time difference adjustment, and the 9F86, which features a date display and a GMT function. Each model is accurate within 10 seconds per year, and the battery life is stated as 3 years, though I would say I've had to change mine twice within a 2-year period. The second hand remains accurate, but skips a second to indicate that the battery needs changing. The movement itself is beautifully finished and designed to protect the rotor, which is held airtight inside. This stops dust getting into the movement when you need to change the battery, and it also extends the life of the lubricating oil, reducing the need for regular servicing. The entire movement is hand assembled by 2 craftspeople, one working on the date indicator and the other building the rest of the movement. The movement is designed with a twin pulse control motor, which allows it to move a larger handset than traditional quartz movements could cope with. The GMT features an excellent set of sword hands, something I've mentioned in the past is a personal preference of mine. Seiko is a huge company, to the point where they grow their own quartz crystals in-house, and Grand Seiko only makes use of the highest quality and most stable crystals in their movements, after a 3-month growing, testing and inspection period. So yes, this is a quartz watch, but it's about as good as a quartz watch could possibly be. Very few people in the world could afford the best possible automatic or manual watches. But here is an opportunity to own something that is getting close to the top of the mountain, without completely breaking the bank. Understanding the functionality of a GMT watch can be a little bit of a minefield. There are a fair number of different versions, each offering slightly different interpretations. Some allowing you to track 2 time zones, some allowing you to track 3, some allowing the hour hand to be adjusted independently in both directions, and so on. I won't go too in depth here, but for those of you not in the know, GMT stands for Greenwich Mean Time, and the premise of the watch is basically to help you monitor your home time when travelling. With the Grand Seiko, the extra GMT hand indicates the hour using the 24-hour fixed bezel. You set the time for the GMT, then modify the hour hand separately, which jumps an hour per click of the crown to whatever local time you want to follow. On a side note, this is the first and only thing I've ever bought through the auction process on eBay. I got it at a decent price, though more than I initially wanted to commit, but I can safely say I don't think my heart could cope with the stress and excitement of auction bidding on a regular basis. For watches in this price bracket and above, the seller has to send the watch for independent verification before it's then sent on to you, so you can have confidence that what you're purchasing is the genuine article. As to be expected with any second-hand purchase, the watch didn't arrive completely factory fresh. There are a fair number of scratches, but they're all on the case back, and I dare say I've added some of my own when changing the battery. I'm quite clumsy in general, and not particularly deft with a case back tool. Much as with any watch I purchase, there's a good period of a few weeks where I'll wear it constantly and bed it in. After that, the amount of wear time it sees is dependent on what I'm wearing in terms of clothes, how I'm feeling, and really, wear time is a good measure of how much I like the watch itself. With the GMT, this has firmly found its home as my travel watch. It just makes sense given the functionality. I also see the quartz movement as a benefit for travel, because at times I get so delirious with jet lag, and it's easy to get confused with time zones. Having something that isn't going to deviate noticeably from day to day and also helps keep track of time at home is a genuinely useful tool to have. The styling also really lends itself to any situation. One thing I'm particularly fond of is the crown. It's quite hard to articulate why, it's just something about the depth of the signed logo that I really like. The sizing of the watch has its strengths and weaknesses. The 39mm diameter is in the sweet spot for me, and with the extra GMT hand and functionality, being 12.1mm thick is not so bad, but I'm sure thinner is possible. One other criticism I would have for the watch is the bracelet. Not the fit or the function, but the form itself. The lack of any tapering with it does lack a little finesse that you might expect from a watch with an RRP in the thousands. It is worth noting that the bracelet itself is comfortable on wrist and has a reassuring weight to it. The watch comes presented in a premium quality box, which really goes a long way to sell this as a luxury item. It comes packaged with both the bracelet but also an extra brown leather strap. Now the individual quality of the strap as an accessory is really impressive. The metalwork on the buckle in particular, for the company name, is excellent. However, I just don't think it really suits the watch at all. The bracelet just makes it feel like a more complete piece in my opinion. The lume patches on the watch are quite small, but very vivid, and they have noticeably more staying power than other watches in my collection, further adding to the sentiment that this really is a watch you can wear on a lot of different occasions. The final really negative thing I would say about my particular watch, something which is just a byproduct of the way I purchased it rather than an actual flaw, I think there are some other colourways available that I would have potentially gone for ahead of this one. But when you're purchasing second hand, when a good deal comes up, you have to weigh up the price against the preference on colour. Let's take a moment to see everything available in the range, and I'll highlight where I think I might be drawn if I was purchasing at RRP. These are the quartz models listed on the official website at the time of making the video. I know there are other limited editions out there that are no longer listed, but for the sake of brevity, we'll focus on these models. There are two here in particular that I think are worth discussing for different reasons. The SBG X353 is an obvious choice from me if you've been following the channel. The textured dial is worth the price of admission alone in my opinion. The SBGN 027 is a more recent version of the watch that I own, in a monochrome variation that, if I'm honest, I slightly prefer. But as far as the current GMT offerings go, I would still go second hand here and go for an older model. The angled crown and date function just don't do it for me at all. You may have noticed that I've deliberately avoided taking the route of focusing on the Zaratsu polishing that Grand Seiko is famous for, as so many other videos rightly do, but that doesn't mean it isn't present here. Indeed, the different finishes on the surfaces of the watch are excellent. It's something you almost take for granted when purchasing from Grand Seiko. The overall build quality of the watch is fantastic. This is a watch that you can have full confidence in. The battery is easy to replace and doesn't need doing often, and it doesn't need winding or wearing regularly to be accurate. If I wasn't so addicted to collecting, there would be a world out there where this could be my one and done watch. It's accurate, handsome, durable, comfortable, and has a unique use case scenario in my collection. But the two things it doesn't have are a textured dial and a spring drive. But still, there's always room in the collection for one more. And I think you could do far worse than spend your time fawning over the Grand Seiko website longing for one. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch the video. As always, it's much appreciated. And if you enjoyed, stick around for more.